So, okay. So we're going to talk about content area reading, which is a professional development plan that I have developed for Denton Elementary School through my graduate course at Wilmington University. Here's a little comic for you guys. Let me check this door. Okay. So at the end of the school year, we took a survey as a staff, and we kind of analyzed that survey, and it was given to 39 people, and I think about like 56% of the staff responded. So, 20 responded, which is 51.2% of the staff. So after analysis of the survey, which I was going to have you guys pull up as a Google Doc, but it wasn't kind of working to do that. I looked at the high points and the low points, and the lowest points were what we were going to base our professional development on. And the lowest points in this survey was that our staff didn't think that we had effective parental support at our school or activities that promoted that, but also that we felt that content area literacy was important to implement, but that we weren't really given effective PD or supplies in order to do that kind of thing. Just that overarching, it was a good idea, but people didn't really know how to do it or what to use to do that. So I decided to base this PD off of content area literacy, mainly because of what we're doing this year with science at our school and how it's encouraged to implement disciplinary literacy through science and put social studies and reading. And I thought giving people some resources and some ideas to do that and some training would be beneficial in effectively implementing literacy. So this survey data showed that the highest number of respondents agreed that beneficial programs needed to be implemented to affect parental community involvement as well as professional training to have resources to effectively implement literacy across content area. So that's the reasoning, and that's why we want to do it too. Do you guys find a purpose in doing content area literacy in your classroom? I want to see this, but it says, what comes to mind when you think of teaching literacy and throughout the content areas? You can write it on a sticky note there. Here's some pens. Check to make sure this is still working. Yep. Oh, you're not. Oh.
This is probably for the best.
So it doesn't say it there, but it says try to sum it up in a few words or on a sticky note, just kind of briefly what comes to mind when you think of teaching literacy through other content areas. Do you guys mind if we share them? Okay. So let's just pretend that we could put them up there. My plan was to capture them with my app, but I don't have that iPad app yet. So deeper understanding of creation and fluency, reading articles and books in science and social studies, and math and word problems. I like the math thing. And never enough time to teach thoroughly, so it can be taught through reading, social studies, literature during reading. I agree with that. So it's kind of like continuing to teach reading while you're still like using up all your other time for other things. So what research backs this up? You guys can read that. I don't want to read things to you. So when I read that, I kind of thought if elementary school teachers are committed to consistent practices that teach them to read through content area practices, then when they get to higher grades in middle school and high school and college, we're not preparing them to read as a scientist or read as a historian. We're just reading to read. And here's another one. So I was kind of shocked there that like high school students have not improved in reading over the past 15 years, personally. But also I thought too, if we were consistent in our practices through grade levels, through K through 5 practices, through middle school, if we're consistent in strategies, kids will be able to use those strategies on their own. Whereas if we're just using strategies kind of like we do now, this day we'll use one thing, the next day we'll do another thing, and this teacher's doing a different thing than the other one. Our kids really going to learn how to be a better reader in rigorous reading. So we're going to read an article. You guys can highlight if you want to with your pen. And then, so this was an article that I read for my research. It's like probably my favorite article I read. The challenges that teachers face in implementing this and the reasoning behind it. So after you do it, you guys can kind of talk with each other about your big takeaways, and we're going to type them up here. you guys off. Why don't you take a second to share with each other what you think were some important points, and then we're going to type them up here.
I think since we're elementary teachers, it's easy to have the elementary mindset of that we have the same kids all day and we see them all the time. And if we want to throw in a math idea during reading, we can say, remember that time we learned this in math. But in secondary, they don't really have that opportunity because the teachers don't necessarily know what each other are doing.
Yeah.
And so that's something that I never really thought about, was just the secondary mindset of integrating the content areas across the subjects.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, like, we take it for granted how easy we can do it. So, like, if those practices are instilled in them now, can they be a better reader in middle school? You know?
I also thought that it makes it harder because, well, it says in here something about how, like, secondary teachers are content experts, whereas we're kind of broad throughout all contents. So they're more focused on getting the content across to the kids instead of the skill.
Yeah, I also like that too.
I think it can be a misconception that a student might not be understanding something if, like, or I'm not good at history, but maybe you're not good at reading. You really are good at history, but you don't realize that you are because you're not getting it because you're not good at reading.
Yeah.
Or whatever subject, biology, any of it.
I feel like it could even tie to math when they, like, can't really understand a word problem.
Yeah.
Maybe you're having trouble reading it, and how can we support that?
But I feel like with math word problems, you really have to read the question carefully and, like, the sequence and, like, the chunks that it should be read in to really understand it. So I definitely agree with math.
I thought an interesting piece was when the author spoke about to be able to mentally process information while reading, and the idea that, like, different types of literature, whether they be fictional or non-fictional, are structured differently. And so students growing up and reading and expecting reading only to be stories as they get to the secondary levels, reading tends to be more informational, and they just might not be prepared to digest information as quickly as it comes or as restructured as it is when you're just reading for fiction. You read a whole story and you gather the main, the meta narrative of the whole story. Whereas if you're reading in history, you have to pick up each piece as it is structured and organized in dates and times. And that is interesting because social studies, you do that on the primary level, but it's a little different when you get to World Civ in high school and you have to do 600 years in a week.
Yeah. I like to, when they talk about, like, it could be as simple as just when you read a text, you do, like, a 3-column, like, diagnostic, and that's what you do every day. And so kids are kind of, like, ingrained in doing, like, that consistent practice.
I think it's something that's overlooked when you already know how to read. Like when the students already know how to read, you just think, okay, they can read, but not thinking that all of these texts are so vastly different from each other. And I like that they said, like, that if students preview the materials, then they can get a better understanding before you just say read this chapter or something. They can kind of figure out how it's structured before they're actually reading it.
And I feel like in elementary grades, we always give them that background information or, like, try to make them have those real world connections before introducing a concept. Whereas in middle and high school, it's just here it is. You may not be able to relate to it, but good luck understanding it.
Yeah. But then you think about, like, how crucial is elementary school in building that? Because when they get to, like, concept teachers, who maybe don't get it as, not that, I don't know, I think it's just a different lens that we're doing it through. Cool. Great discussion. I'm gonna pull this back up. You guys can read that. I kind of typed as we were saying it. So. Don't know why that's. Okay, so effective, I'll read it to you, but it doesn't show up there well on the projector. Different components to effective content area literacy instruction. So I think we can think, okay, this is a good thing, but how do I go about it? What are like my 3 big components? So the first thing we're going to talk about is word identification. So using contextual analysis, phonetic analysis, or structural analysis. Contextual analysis is figuring out, okay, what is this word? Just how do I read it based on what is in the text? If I read the sentence, can I even decode what this word means? Similarly with phonetic or structural analysis, knowing what a suffix or a prefix means and how that can help you to decode the word, and that's just in being able to say it, not what it means, but just being able to say a word in context. How can we teach kids to break that word apart based on using the context clues? Another one is vocabulary, which I feel like you fall into in like 3rd grade and up. They're really understanding how to decode words and read, but they come to these words and they think, I have no idea what that means, but I can read it perfectly. So association processing, comprehension processing, and generation processing are pretty similar, using like those context clues and what is happening in the text to, let me get down there. What's happening in the text to understand the word. So here's a quote from research that I read. It says secondary students acquire about 3,000 new words per year as they read materials as part of content area independent reading. So if we prepare students for secondary education, middle school and above, and we build their vocabulary understanding, I think that they'll be able to understand context a lot better at that level. And lastly is comprehension. So that's kind of like what we talked about in that article. We need to set a clear purpose, have kids preview the text before they read it, and demonstrate a clear modeling, whether we read it beforehand and we stop as we're reading aloud and ask questions aloud, and modeling how students might think through text as they're understanding it. Using those text-dependent questions both on paper but also orally, and then also asking the students to maybe think of their own text-dependent questions as they get better at the skill. Another quote was, through modeling, teachers should also ask test-dependent questions while reading, which demonstrates to students the importance of questioning while they read. But if students can question themselves, they'll build a better understanding. Okay, this is just the literacy program and what we're going to explain. You guys can read that. So in reading that, I thought, we're not just teaching students how to read, but rather how to analyze text. I think in primary grades, they're really focusing on how to read, how to decode, but also even starting in kindergarten should think about, okay, what's it saying here? Is this a science text? Is this a history text? And just to kind of start that kind of conversation through elementary school. So the way, as we've been talking about, the way we read scientific research document is different than the way I read a novel. It's just different. Your mind is different. The way you question is different. So teaching students to do that and what we naturally do is important to their understanding. So in this, I had to develop a professional development plan for the year for teachers. So here are some goals for the professional development plan. So there will be a team of teachers to collect resources appropriate for kindergarten through 5th grade content area teaching. Some of those resources, I have kind of like some books to read or articles like this for teachers to gain a deeper understanding and an insight and a different lens into teaching content area standards. Provide a large group of professional development meeting with appropriate applicable strategies geared towards implementing reading strategies across content area and elementary school classrooms, allowing time for teachers to meet in their PLC teams. So I think sometimes, and we've kind of talked about this over the summertime, is that we will start the year with this big PD and think, okay, go implement that, and we won't talk about it throughout the rest of the year. And that's not good teaching if that's what we want our students to do. We want to be consistent teachers, so we want to be consistent in our PD too. So I think that if we were to fully implement content area literacy in a good way, we'd have a big vision at the beginning of the year and then continually hit that. I mean, once a month, talk about that in your PLC time, and also have faculty meetings as well. So there's a timeline for implementation. I actually developed a timeline like from August to the end of the year and different topics that we would talk about. Also, some videos to watch too, specific to what should we talk about in a PLC and what does that look like. So some of those might be partnered with, okay, we're gonna, this time, like sometime this month, everybody's gonna read an article, maybe like this one, or some other ones that I've selected. And then, you know, at our 4th PLC at the month, we're gonna talk about it and talk about how we can use that to influence our practices. So just kind of like we're setting a purpose for our students, we need to set a purpose for ourselves. So in our plan, we're gonna improve students' understanding of disciplinary text and specific content knowledge as determined by formative and summative assessments. And we'll go into that in a little bit, but I thought teachers could use the American Reading Company, and also iReady, but specifically American Reading Company to diagnose students' understanding of nonfiction texts, like once a month or whenever they're assessing them, and say, okay, are they getting better at decoding this, at figuring out vocabulary words, at their comprehension with specific content area text. And you could even say, okay, I'm going to read a social studies text with you today, and how are you reading that differently than your scientific text? And recording that and then sharing that with your PLC team. So these are the resources. There's a text by VACA that I said, like in my budget, that we would purchase it as a school. That's content area text. So read books and downloadable materials as a staff throughout the whole year, which I think is key as you're constantly reflecting and trying to build that into your practices. A large group meeting at the start of the year to set the focus. We hear from administration and the board. Thought it would be cool to hear from Debbie George and from Carrie Hutchins about the importance of doing this kind of reading and instruction throughout your time. Your PLC time is time to reflect and build lessons that reflect content area literacy. I think that's key to do that together. If you wrote a lesson, to share it with Katie. And your faculty meetings, once a month meeting at faculty meetings to review resources and to share ideas. And that could be as simple as we're just going to sit down and say, can we share out some ways that we have incorporated disciplinary literacy in your lessons this month. So in this component, there is a family involvement plan. You guys can go ahead and read that. So I thought this was a really interesting quote. This one too. So I thought that those two quotes really stuck out to Caroline County in particular, how it's a low income area, and I think instead of saying, man, these students are coming from X, Y, and Z, they can't, that thinking that if we have high family participation, how can we engage our community and our family, that's twice as predictive of student success as their socioeconomic status. So thinking that these students really could rise if we really do put an emphasis on family and community involvement. In my family involvement plan that was developed, that it's key to build a community understanding by hosting events and going to where families are. Instead of saying, come to our school, we're doing this thing. Come to our school, we're going to do a family night. Going to communities and saying, come to the library. We're going to host this event tonight. Come to this community center. We're going to do that. Providing information geared towards building literacy at home in a monthly school newsletter. I actually developed, which I can give to you guys, something to put in a newsletter every month to say, read this type of text with your kid and talk about this. Go to the library and talk about this. Some kind of activity that maybe not every parent might do, but if some kind of percentage of parents do, how could that affect the kids? And And again, using power goals and reading logs through the American Reading Company to involve parents in the reading process. So tying those goals sometimes to your nonfiction text. If you're noticing that Timmy isn't understanding science text, sending him science books and saying, we're going to read this type of text, but we're still going to work on these phonics goals and these vocabulary things, but we're going to specifically read this type of text. So that goes on to selecting text to read, discussing, and reflecting on at home. What are your guys' thoughts and reflections on going to where parents are, going into the community?
I think that's a really big part of getting people involved. I know sometimes people that aren't always in the school setting feel like the school's an intimidating place. And they don't feel comfortable coming here. And so to go to even just the library, which they might still have just as long of a drive or walk to get to the library, might be more inviting to them because they go to the library for other things too.
More like a common ground.
One activity that I put on the plan was to have like a school like gathering before the Christmas parade, because I thought a lot of kids go to the Christmas parade, and to partner with the Historical Society downtown and like tour the museum and just kind of like learn historical things and then go to the parade together, because that's where the parents are. Another couple things were to start the year actually here, but with like a cookout, like having like hot dogs and just inviting parents to come and have a hot dog, and then at that share a vision for the school year and how we want to increase literacy, and this is our plan to do it.
I think it's so important to get parents on board with that kind of thing.
Yeah, and especially thinking that it's more predictive of their success in their socioeconomic status.
But I think some parents need tips or need to be reminded of how to be an involved parent. Like, if we say, here are the things you can do to be involved in your kid's life, then they can look at that list and be like, oh yeah, I can do that. Like I just think it sounds so simple, but I think it needs
Giving
to
them
be
like
laid out for them.
little nuggets of information. Yeah. Okay. So this is like a budget for the student activity, the parent involvement plan that we just looked at. You guys can read through that, but the budget total estimated was like $668 and a penny. So at the end of this plan, I did like apply for grants to supplement this income, which was one of them was the Lowe's like toolbox for education grant, and then another one was a students in need grant. Some of which I thought could be maybe donated by PTA, like hot dogs and things like that. But so we're gonna also go through diversity resources and ways to integrate continuity literacy and the connection and purpose to our plan. So I think in teaching continuity literacy, it's important to think about, are we teaching to diverse learners, but also are we teaching diversity in our are we teaching diversity in our instruction? So in order for this to be implemented effectively, I think we need to be aware of our audience and to teach to all learners. So our school system should strive to broaden students' perspective of culture and individual differences, and that'll deepen their understanding of the world. So this is actually just a section, and I will give you guys the whole thing of diversity resources. It's front and back, but I wanted you to kind of look through it and highlight maybe like 2 or 3 activities or books that you might want to use in your classroom. And these actually, this diversity resource page, all the books shown here are already in our school. So if you star them, then we're gonna have like a time to maybe share with each other which books or activities we liked. So there's a purpose, like what the book is about, a brief synopsis, as well as a connection to diversity needs, and then an activity that you can do in your classroom. want you guys to just take the time to share, I know it's just a small group, but just share with each other. What books or resources have you used, and then how have you used them in your classroom? You don't have to share with me, you can just share with each other.
I've used mountains in my classroom. But I didn't really look at it as a diversity thing. I just looked at it like, hey, we're learning about mountains. But I think it's interesting to think like these kids haven't seen mountains. Like some of these children have never left Denton, Maryland, and so the fact that there are so many other landforms that they've never seen, and just to be able to experience that in a book is a good way for them to realize that these do exist in our world.
We did the Discovery Life plant videos, and I thought that was really cool because plants are not really a subject that some people get super excited about. But that was really cool to just see like a time lapse video of how plants grow and talk about their adaptations and why they work in one environment and not another.
Are there any, and then you guys can talk to each other about, are there any resources that you're interested in exploring and using in your instruction this year?
I saw this social studies one about Harriet Tubman,
Which one was it?
the Minty.
Oh, okay.
I thought that was interesting and like a really good idea to like talk about the vocabulary words and what they mean in that context, and making a tree diagram and making their own definitions to kind of like internalize that concept.
I mean, Henry's freedom box is interesting. The idea of trying to put yourself into thought process of a slave, even as a third or a fourth grader. I mean, even as an adult, it's still hard to conceive. But for them to hear the slave songs is a great idea. Just for them to kind of again feel as well as read and interpret what it was like at the time.
So how do we monitor success in this literacy plan? I said that we could use the IRLA. Then teachers could just more specifically on the IRLA assess student understanding of nonfiction or context-specific texts, and then track that progress in the IRLA. Also, I-Ready diagnostic tests. There's beginning of year and end of year data, but it also is able to be disaggregated and show what is their understanding of fictional text versus nonfiction text. So I think that's a great way to show if we did implement this, what's their growth and change from beginning of year to the end of year. Park, but Park is only at the end of year, so you kind of would have to wait 2 years to really show growth in that implementation. And you can disaggregate Park by standard too when you look at your data. I think when performance matters, so that is a cool thing that you could look at, grading across content areas and nonfiction text. And then formative and summative assessments, that's what we kind of talked about in PLC time that you could talk about. I gave this formative test or the summative test in my class, and how we're going to then take that data, change our instruction to build phonics and vocabulary comprehension together as we work collaboratively. Do you guys have any questions or anything? Okay, great. I'm going to turn this off, but I would ask for you to fill out like a strengths and weakness paper.